Hi, everyone. Hi, thank you all for coming today. I'm Rachel Allen, a sophomore and one of the editor-in-chiefs of The Quill, Bowdoin's arts and literary magazine. We'd like to extend our thanks to Kimberly Wing and Sarah Chingos in the Education Department for coordinating Ms. Palacio's visit tonight. And most importantly, thank you to Ms. Palacio for being with us today. Following tonight's talk, Ms. Palacio will be available outside of Kresge to sign books, and books will be available for purchase. Ms. Palacio is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Wonder, a novel about a 10-year-old boy, Augie, with a severe facial difference who is starting private middle school for the first time after being homeschooled his whole life. The novel deftly flips between character perspectives, from Augie to his sister to his friends, allowing us to see how much Augie has touched those closest to him. Wonder has been on the New York Times bestseller list for almost 4 straight years since it was first published in February 2012. It sold over 1 million copies in its first 18 months. Wonder is Ms. Palacio's first novel. Before publishing Wonder, she worked as an art director and book jacket designer for more than 20 years. Since releasing Wonder, she published 365 Days of Wonder, Mr. Brown's Book of Precepts, an expanded collection of the precepts or inspirational mottos that Augie's English teacher instills in the class. The collection includes some precepts from children who sent them in to Ms. Palacio. Furthering the Wonder collection, last year, Ms. Palacio published Augie and Me, 3 Wonder Stories, a collection of stories from the points of view of 3 of Augie's classmates. Through all these works, Ms. Palacio's passion for kindness has inspired countless readers, a commitment she continues through her campaign for everyday acts of kindness, Choose Kind. A New York Times review rightly claimed, Palacio has an uncanny grasp on the minds and hearts of 8 to 12-year-olds and the people who used to be them. Wonder is a story that crosses the ages. It's told with the honesty and keenness of a 10-year-old boy, and it's got the kindness and bravery we all admire. We wish to enter Augie's home and be embraced, as he is, by his family. While the story is at times profoundly sad, the characters never fail to pick us and each other up. Augie's story makes us question our own assumptions and self-absorptions by promoting more than necessary kindnesses and friendships, actions that apply to any stage in our lives. Whether we are kids or parents or here college students determined to push ourselves out of childhood yet nervous for full adulthood, these lessons of taking care of each other are most important. We are honored to have Ms. Palacio here at Bowdoin. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate those words. That was really beautiful. Thank you so much. It's my privilege to be here at Bowdoin and speaking to this great audience. I have been really, really lucky. I'm so blessed. And writing Wonder has just been one of those, I don't know, it was like a kind of a magical moment for me. So what I thought I would do is share a little bit of the story of how I came to write Wonder, because as Rachel just pointed out, it was my first novel, and I'm 52 years old, so if you do the math, you have to kind of figure that I was doing something before I wrote Wonder. So I thought it would be kind of an interesting story to share a little bit about how I came to be here speaking to all of you today. So I will start with the fact, as Rachel said, that Wonder came out almost 4 years ago last month, February 14th, 2012. It is, as Rachel also pointed out, about a little boy named Augie Pullman who was born with a severe facial difference, and it's about his 5th grade year and how he gets accepted or not accepted by kids in his school, by the community, by the teachers. And more than anything, it's also a meditation on kindness, on the impact and the power of kindness, because as I was writing it, I was very conscious of the fact that 8 to 12-year-olds often need to be reminded about kindness. I think they have so much kindness in their hearts and their souls, But in that middle school rush to gain popularity and to do things and to sort of experiment with who they are, sometimes those very, very basic truths about who they are get lost in the shuffle. So I wanted to write a book that touched on that. So let me just start with telling you a little bit about myself, though, and how I came to be an author, because it was not an immediate thing. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Raquel Jaramillo. Palacio was my mother's maiden name. I was born in New York City. I am a first-generation American. My parents were Colombian immigrants. And I grew up in a house full of books. My parents were big readers, and I grew up surrounded by books, reading and loving books. And it's no surprise that I wanted to grow up and be a writer. I could also draw. For some reason, I don't know why, it was just one of the things that I kind of did. And I'm often asked what kinds of books influenced me when I was growing up, and I still have them. That's why I took a picture of them, because I still have them on my library shelves. And what all of these books had in common for me was that they were written and illustrated by the same person. And I wanted to be that person. I wanted to grow up and write and illustrate my own books. So I went to Parsons School of Design, majored in illustration. My idea was that I would keep writing for myself, and that would be kind of my secret sort of inner life thing. But I would make a living doing art, making art, being an illustrator. So I went to Parsons, majored in illustration, graduated from school, and got pretty lucky. I mean, pretty early on, I started getting work published. I did work for the New York Times, for the Village Voice. I started doing book covers. These were early paintings of mine, and a funny thing happened. You know, when you're 21 years old, you just graduated, you think you want one thing, and you realize that what you want is something different. And I realized early on that the freelance illustrator life was not for me. I really wasn't, I wanted a steady paycheck. I wanted actually to be an art director. I didn't realize that till I started meeting art directors and getting work. But I ended up deciding that I would go into book publishing. I figured it was a great way to be around books and just kind of, learn as much as I could about the industry of book publishing. And so I ended up becoming an assistant at Scribner's, and my job was to help all the designers, and I learned about fonts. It was really great for me because I started designing book covers before, and this is going to sound crazy, but before the age of computers. There were no computers back when I was first designing book covers. So what was really wonderful about that is that as I was designing book covers, I was learning programs as they were being launched. So I was in on the ground floor with Photoshop and InDesign and all those programs that people now have to learn. I just kind of learned as we went along. And it was really great. I did all kinds of books. Fiction, nonfiction, biographies, mass market, all kinds of adult books. I didn't do children's books. My specialty was adult books. And it was an incredible experience for me. I mean, I did that for most of my adult life. I spent 25 years in book publishing doing exactly this, designing book covers, hanging out with a lot of authors, meeting them, doing book covers for Paul Auster and Thomas Pynchon and Salman Rushdie, and it was just such a great learning experience for me to hang out with editors and authors and just sort of imbibe what book publishing is. And I'm talking a lot about it now because I'm also here to tell you guys what a great industry it is and how it's alive and well, because I know people have been talking about the death of books for a long time, but it's not so at all. So in the meanwhile, I started a family. I got married, had my children, and having children kind of reawakened in me a desire to go back to that very first ambition of mine, which was to write and illustrate children's books. So because I knew Photoshop and because I had lots of photos of babies at home, I started photo illustrating my own children's books. And I did an illustrated version of Peter Pan, which I photographed in my living room, and I hired child models, and I used friends from the neighborhood, and I started publishing a bunch of books, and it was really a great experience, and there was still a part of me, I have to admit, that still longed to write the big novel that I always thought I would write, but I was so busy between my day job and being a mom that I just thought, okay, well, that'll be something I do when I retire, when I have the time. But then that kind of all changed one day. And I know I see a lot of kids in the room, young middle schoolers, right? And I can bet that maybe a couple of you have read Wonder. Can I have a show of hands? How many of you have read Wonder? Oh my goodness, wow. Well, so you all know that there's a chapter in the book from Jack Will's point of view, and he talks about the very first time he sees Augie, right? Do you guys remember that? Well, that was actually based on a real experience I had when I was with my kids, and my younger son was about 3 years old, and we found ourselves in front of an ice cream store, and my younger son, well, how to tell the story, I don't want to go on too much about it, but basically, as my older son went inside to get us some chocolate milkshakes, my younger son and I were waiting out front, and we found ourselves sitting next to a little girl who was probably about 6 or 7, and she had a very, very severe facial difference. She looked very much like what I describe Augie as looking like in the book. And I knew that the moment my little 3-year-old looked up and saw her, I knew that he would probably react in a way that unfortunately might hurt her feelings. I knew he would probably start to cry, because he was one of those little toddlers that is very, very sensitive to things like that. In fact, for Halloween, we'd had to go back inside because he got so freaked out by all the zombie masks that, he couldn't experience it. So I kind of knew that he would react. At the time, I thought that the best thing I could do was to slowly and without calling any attention to myself, turn the stroller around and walk to the other side of the sidewalk and wait for my older son to meet us there. And that's indeed exactly what I started to do. I started to get up and was going to just, without calling any attention to us, turn the stroller around and just keep walking. But unfortunately, my son looked up, and he reacted exactly the way I thought he would react. He immediately started to cry. In my hurry to kind of block the little girl from seeing his reaction, I got up, kind of snapped the stroller around as quickly as I could, grabbed my older son who was just coming out of the store, and was like, come on, let's go, and just kept on walking. And even as I was leaving, I was kicking myself. I was like, there was a voice in me saying, stop, go back, make it right, go talk to the little girl or apologize or do something. But I was so afraid of making an awkward situation worse that I just kind of kept pushing the stroller. And I immediately, really, as soon as I was too far to go back without really making a scene, I regretted it so much because I realized that I had missed this perfect opportunity. I had handled it completely wrong. What I should have done, what I didn't even have the wherewithal to do, was use that as a teaching moment. I mean, as parents, we're always looking for those moments in life that present themselves when we can take a situation and impart some wonderful piece of wisdom to our children. And here a situation had presented itself to me, and I had just kind of blown it. Because, of course, I realized afterwards that what I should have done was I should have simply turned to the little girl and started up a conversation and shown my little son that, by my example, that there was nothing to be afraid of, But I kind of blew it. And I beat myself up so much about that. For the rest of the day, I could think of nothing else. I kept on replaying that scene in my mind about, what I could have done differently, and I had kind of these fantasy alternative realities of what could have happened. I would have become best friends with the mom, we would have gone to have coffee, birthday party. I mean, I had this whole other alternative reality in my head. And that night, I happened to turn on the radio, which is something I never do because I usually have my playlists and stuff, but that night I just turned on the radio. And Natalie Merchant's song Wonder came on. Now, probably anyone over the age of 35 might know who Natalie Merchant is. Maybe you guys don't. But Wonder came out in 1995 or 96. I remember it because I used to listen to it nonstop. If in fact it was my sort of my lullaby for my older son whenever he was a baby and I would bounce him around and I would sing Wonder. So I must have listened to that song literally hundreds of times because it's a great song. If you haven't heard it before, go out, download it. It's so good. But that night, the words really resonated with me because the song is all about being born different. A child is born that is so different that doctors come from all over to see this child. And there was a line in the song. They say I must be one of the wonders of God's own creation. And that line just kind of like, it was like one of those light bulb moments, you know? I just thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to write a book. And it's going to be from the point of view of a little child who has that facial difference, and it's going to be about what it must be like to face a world every day that doesn't know how to face you back. And it's going to be called Wonder. And I started actually writing that very night, and I still have my little Post-its. In fact, the first line of the book is, I know I'm not an ordinary kid. And it's right there. It's not in the original draft. He was named Ian, but do you see the second line is, I see myself as just an ordinary kid. Obviously, it was the very first draft of it. I kept writing on those Post-it notes until I realized that it's not a very practical way to write a book. So I quickly moved it over to my laptop, and I kept writing. I got into this routine where for the next year and a half, the only time of the day I could find to write was in the middle of the night. I would put my younger son to bed, fall asleep with him a little bit while reading a book, and then wake up at around midnight and then write till about 3 in the morning. And I did that for about a year and a half. And that was it. That was the book. Because I was in book publishing, I can't say that getting the book published was an arduous process. I knew exactly who to call. I knew how to get an agent, all of those things that are kind of difficult for first-time authors. I didn't have to experience because I could draw on many friendships and connections. So I won't even pretend that getting published was difficult. I will say, though, that because I'm in publishing, I had zero expectations for this book reading a large public. It wasn't one of those, it wasn't about vampires or fairies, and it wasn't one of those kinds of books that any of us thought would find a large audience. So at the time that I published it, this was a little sign in front of my community bookstore in Brooklyn, and this is as good as I thought it was going to get. I had a signing, we had about 20 friends come, and it was great, and I was so happy I got a book published, and yay, and in fact, this was my younger son was about 7 years old by the time it got published. And he and I read the book together when it came out, and this was his little note that he left for me one morning. And for me, this was like as good as it could get, and I was grateful and I was happy, and that's where I thought it would end. But then a funny thing happened. Well, not a funny thing, a great thing happened. The theme of the book, well, as I said, on the surface, it is about a boy with a facial difference. As anyone who's read it, you know that really the theme of the book is about kindness. And there was a line in the book, which is this line, which wasn't even my line. It's a line by Wayne Dyer, a quote. And this quote just really, really resonated with teachers and librarians very early on. Teachers and librarians discovered this book, as well as booksellers who were hand-selling it. And really fairly quickly, the book started to gain traction in the marketplace. And the Choose Kind thing became a movement of its own. Very quickly, my publisher launched a website where kids could kind of go online and pledge to choose kind and share their stories of standing up to bullies and Yeah, things like that. And so it just kept on mushrooming. We have classrooms that are being certified kind, which is, teachers keep a mason jar on their desks, and every time a child does an act of kindness, a little marble goes in the jar, and when they have a full jar, they get certified kind, and they get banners and goodies and all sorts of stuff. There was a billboard in Times Square, which if you're from New York City, that's like a big deal for you. There were all sorts, it just kind of, like I said, it started mushrooming as I was asked to go around the country to kind of preach the kindness aspect of the book. I went all over. I visited the Rio Grande and Chicago, and people were started doing school-wide reads, where not just a grade would read the book, but the entire school from kindergarten through high school would all read the book together and come together as a community. And then I would go talk at those schools. Then people started doing staged readings of Wonder. It started becoming community-wide reads. So it's not just a school, but an entire community for a month or 2 months or a year or whatever would start reading Wonder together and then coming together as a community to discuss the messages of Wonder. It became like a statewide read in Vermont, and it was mushrooming. The sort of kids were being inspired to, and still are being inspired to raise money for Operation Smile and organizations that help children with craniofacial differences. So it's just, Valentine's Day. I get Valentine's Day cards from people. People have been making videos. Teachers have been making videos that inspire kids to choose kindness. This is kind of cool that October 10th happens to be Augie's birthday in the book. So teachers have started celebrating Augie Pullman's birthday in their classrooms on October 10th. I think it's just an excuse to have cake in the classroom, but whatever, I'll take it, And so the precepts is another thing that has really taken off, and kids making artwork inspired by stories in the book. And I went to one school in Texas where the entire school, they all created masks, sort of inspired by the cover of the book, and they were asked to talk about who they were underneath their masks. It was really, I thought, an amazing thing. So, it's great. And then it got published around the world. I was on the BBC in England, where it was published both as a children's book and as an adult book. Exact same book. The only difference was the cover. The red cover was for the adults, the blue cover was for the kids. And it's been published now in 44 languages, I think, so far. I didn't even know there were 44 languages. It was amazing. But really, the most amazing thing for me has been sort of the emails that I continue to get. Most of the emails, as you can imagine, are from middle schoolers, kids who have read Wonder and have been inspired by the message and want to do kind things. We feel changed because we read your book. We feel more respectful to people no matter how they look. The story impacted me to be a better person. When you hear that from a 10-year-old, I have to say it's very moving. It's pretty amazing. But it's not just from little kids that I heard. I got this email pretty early on from this woman who was 92 years old when she wrote me the email. And she talked about this moment, how she read Wonder and she liked it. And she said that when she read it, she was reminded of a moment in her life when she was 13 years old and her dad had just died and her mother was sick and she was sent to live with a friend of hers. And this friend was very kind to her, but she was going to this friend's school, and one day this friend was out sick, and so this little girl went and sat at the lunch table she usually would sit with, the girls that she was sitting with, but because her friend was out sick, the other girls at the table took their trays, got up, left the table, snickering. Mean girls. And this woman went on to have a wonderful life and doesn't even think that much about it, but 92 years old, she still remembered that one incident, and she wrote to me about it. And so when I would go around and talk to kids around the country, I would always show them this email because it's a good reminder of the impact of your words and your actions, even when you're 10 or 11 or 12 years old. And I would ask the kids in the audience, I mean, do you want to be remembered 8 decades from now for being one of those girls at the table who were so unkind to a little girl who needed kindness? Or would you rather be remembered 8 decades from now for being, like Summer, a kid who was brave enough and kind enough to go sit with Augie Pullman on the very first day of school? And I think that's when I start seeing kids sort of really, really get it, that the things they do are noticed, that their actions do actually have an impact, and they have the power, even at 10 or 11 or 12, to not only make someone's day, but to change someone's life just through kindness. So by far, though, the most overwhelming response I've gotten has been from the craniofacial community. There are lots of children born every year with craniofacial differences. Most not as severe as Augie's are in the book, but differences nevertheless. And they have embraced this book so much, and I've gotten to meet and spend time with them. This mom wrote to me. She said that her son had always used to wear, just like Augie, used to wear a mask for Halloween, but he decided after reading Wonder this year that he was going to take away the mask and go with something else. And she was kind of nervous. She didn't know how it would go, but she wrote me later and said that it went really well, and her son had gained sort of a new confidence in who he was and what he looked like. They send me their pictures of their children. Some have Treacher-Collins syndrome, which is what Augie has in the book. Some have other syndromes. There are lots of syndromes. I met this little girl. She's amazing, and she's like 16 years old, but she suffers from some condition in which I guess I don't even know what the condition is. But anyway, they have their differences. They have their facial differences that make them easy targets in schools and at malls and on buses and on subways. And they have all taken this book and really, really wrapped their arms around it in a way that makes me feel so humbled and grateful. This is where I'm going to end soon. I just want to tell you this story because this is one of my favorite. There's a little boy named Peter Dankelson. He has golden Haar syndrome. He was born without an ear. And he's a really great kid. I've since met him. His mother is a member of the Children's Craniofacial Association, and she has a regular blog. After Peter read Wonder, he decided to write a guest blog post for his mom's website. And he wrote about how much he loved Wonder and how much he admired Augie. And in fact, he felt very, very he related to Augie a lot. He said that he and Augie actually had a lot in common. Like Augie, he had an October birthday. Like Augie, he had to wear an hearing aid. Like Augie, he loves Star Wars. Like Augie, he's just an ordinary kid. And then he mentioned that unlike Augie, the only thing that they have different, one of the things that they have different is that he never has received a standing ovation in his life. Because at the end of Wonder, Augie gets a standing ovation from his classmates. Well, there was a classroom full of kids somewhere across the country who at that time were also reading Wonder. And I guess they came across this blog post. So they decided to send him a video message. And they wrote, "Hi, Peter. Our class has heard about how much you love Wonder. We love it too. We wanted to do something special for you and send some kindness your way." And unfortunately, I don't have the video of it. I wish I did. But they shot a video of themselves giving him a standing ovation. They went around each of the rooms, and they all got up and started cheering for Peter, this little boy that they had never met, all in the spirit of kindness, just sending him a little love. And now you have had a standing ovation too. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Mrs. Posey's 5th grade students. you can imagine that for me, that was like the ultimate act of atonement for my sin 4 years earlier. I read this and I feel newly inspired by just how amazing kids are and how incredible their capacity. They have such noble hearts, and I think as parents and as teachers and educators, my hope is that we tap into what is already there and just remind them about the importance of being kind to one another. So these are my other books, and that's my story. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer questions or anything you'd like. But thank you very much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. It's been a real honor to talk to you guys today. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So if you have questions, I think we have a microphone. Yeah, great. Thank you. Victoria will go around and so.
Does anyone have a question?
There we go.
Were you involved in the cover design of Wonder?
I was involved, as you can imagine. I purposely did not want to design the cover because, oh God, one of the things about being an art director, one of the things you learn very quickly is that no one ever agrees on what makes a good cover. So, most people haven't read most of the books out there, but everyone will have an opinion about a book cover. And so you have to kind of develop a really thick skin. But for this, I wanted my experience to be purely about being an author. And I thought, okay, if I end up designing the cover, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to have people coming up to me telling me they like the book, but they hate the cover. And I just didn't want to go there. So having said that, I did have an agreement with my editor that if their art department came up with a book cover that I really didn't like, that I would step in and design it myself. But we worked together, and they hired the illustrator I liked, and they came up with this concept, which I thought was brilliant. And I was happy as could be. I love the cover. Yeah.
Which of your characters in the book do you think you related most to when you were their age?
That's a great question. I would say that I related a lot to Via, even though I didn't have her same life experiences. I didn't have a little brother who got a lot of the attention or anything like that. But when I was writing her, she came very naturally to me, and I didn't even know why. And it wasn't until an old friend of mine read the book, and she said, and this friend of mine has known me forever, and she said, you're Via. When you were 15, you're totally Via. And I was like, really? And then I thought about it. It's like, oh, yeah, that's why she came so easily to me. I would also say that, sometimes kids ask, like, who do I think I would have been the most like when I was in the 5th grade? And I would love to be able to say that I would have been Summer, because I'd love to think that I would have been that brave and that great. But I think I would have been most like Charlotte. Do you remember Charlotte? Charlotte and Summer, to me, kind of epitomize the difference between, Charlotte's a nice girl. She's never one of the ones that is part of the bullying that happens. She always says, hello, Augie, from a distance, hi. But she never actually goes out of her way to befriend Augie, not like Summer does. So in a way, the difference between Summer and Charlotte it's sort of, to me, Charlotte is someone who's nice, and Summer is someone who's kind. And being nice is great. It's a great start. But to really, really have an impact, choosing to be kind is one step further. And it's hard to be Summer. It takes a lot of evolving and growing up. And some people aren't ready to be a Summer, but it's fun to be a Charlotte too. So it's a good first step.
Are you planning any other books?
I am. I'm writing another book now, but it's not about Wonder. It's not, I thought, after the 3 books, I'm ready to tell a different story. And I can't tell you yet what that story is because it's kind of a secret. Not even my editor knows. But it's going to be a big departure from Wonder. But it's still going to be about children. It's going to be about 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds.
So in the Julian chapter, you talk about Julian's grandmother, and in the during World War II, when she's when she from the I'm gonna call him the crab because I don't. Oh well, Julian.
Yeah.
Sorry. When Julian is saving her, is this true story or not?
It's not a true story. It's I've always been very, very intrigued. I don't want to say fascinated, but intrigued and moved by stories of survivors from the Holocaust and other refugees. I'm moved always by stories of people who, despite the most devastating, dehumanizing circumstances, somehow manage to be kind to one another. Talk about Summer being brave in a modern-day school and having the courage to sit down with a kid who looks different. Imagine, that the kind of bravery it took when lives were on the line and when people had no food, and that's always very much inspired me. So the thing with Julian's the bad guy in Wonder. And I purposely didn't include his storyline, his point of view in Wonder, because Wonder was very much Augie Pullman's story from beginning to end. And the only kids that we hear from in Wonder are people who can expand Augie's storyline. And Julian's big problem was that he never bothered to get to know Augie. So as a result, he really had nothing to impart in terms of getting to know, any wisdom about Augie. But I knew he had a story to tell, and I knew when I was writing him that what was motivating his meanness was fear. He was afraid of Augie, he just didn't know how to deal with it, and he wasn't getting the help he needed from his parents to really, really get to the bottom of why he was just being so wicked with Augie. So it took his grandmother telling a story about something that happened long ago for him to finally have that epiphany, that revelation. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm the mean kid. Because I don't think he ever saw it that way.
Why did you name Augie Augie?
One of the great things about writing a book is that you kind of get to use up all the names you always wanted to, if I had kept on having kids, one of them would have been called Augie at some point. I love the name Augie. All the names, Miranda and Justin and Julian and Jack, they're all, Charlotte, and they're all names that I really liked. And that's kind of the really fun part of writing. I mean, one of the many fun parts is getting to use all the names you've always liked.
I'm wondering how you chose to use a different name as an author. And how did you survive staying up from midnight to 3 a.m.? What was that time like for you to spend those hours writing, not knowing it was going to be so successful and really doing it seemingly for something that for yourself?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. After a while, I was very tired. I won't deny that. But after a while, it got to be such an... Well, first I will say, there's the old adage, if you want something done, give it to a busy person, because you're just sort of you're just doing stuff. But in terms of getting up in the middle of the night, it actually, after a while, once I started getting to the stories, I have to say it was quiet and it was kind of wonderful. No one else knew this world yet, and as I was writing it. And it was kind of a magic, I mean, it sounds kind of goofy to say, but it was really kind of a magical time because I was writing these characters. They felt like real people to me. And there comes a point when you're so far along that you realize if you don't finish, no one else will ever know who they are. So you're kind of almost, I mean, it does sound corny, but you're kind of committed to the characters. You want to tell the story. And I thought it was a story that was worth a little bit of sleep deprivation to write. I knew that I thought I was onto something that was worthy of finishing. And so that's kind of what motivated me, because there does come that wonderful moment when you're writing, you don't know what's going to come next. It's the characters kind of are telling you what's coming next. They really kind of take over. There were times, in fact, I remember there's one scene in the book when, you guys would know who've read it, when Augie is out in the reserve, the nature reserve, and he's there with Jack, and the bullies come along, and they're chasing him through the cornfields, and Augie has gotten rescued by a couple of kids that have always been kind of mean to him throughout the entire year, but they actually kind of rescue him. And so all these 5 kids are kind of running through the cornfields, and they're out of breath, and they don't have a flashlight, and it's dark, and they're finally catching their breaths. And Jack, who has been Augie's friend, turns to these kids and is like, "Yo, dudes, thank you for rescuing us." And he does that thing that guys do, the high five in the air, and they say, "Oh yeah, it's fine." And then Augie does that same thing. He's like, "Guys, thanks so much." And he also puts his hand in the air. But he doesn't know if they're going to high-five him back because, all year long, these are kids who have never touched him, who haven't even talked to him. And yet he has the courage to kind of put his hand up there in the air. I didn't know when I was writing that scene whether they were going to high-five him back. And when they did, I was so happy. It was like, yay! I really didn't know how it was going to go. So that was really kind of cool. And there were moments like that so I would kind of wake up and write the story, but it was also like coming to a familiar world. And in terms of how I came to the name, I was known in the industry as Raquel Jaramillo, book jacket designer, art director, the author of some of those other books. And having said before that I did draw on my connections, I was also actually afraid of putting any friends of mine in an awkward position of having to reject my manuscript one day and see me at a conference the next day, which was very likely, and which in fact did happen. So I submitted the manuscript under a pseudonym. No one knew it was me, Raquel Jaramillo, submitting the manuscript. And in fact, the manuscript was submitted to 7 different publishers, 4 of which passed. One of those publishers was at the publisher I worked in for 17 years. I knew the editor who was rejecting it. And she would have felt really badly if she knew she was rejecting my book. So that's the reason really I went with the pen name. I wasn't planning on keeping the pen name until at publication. It was just for the submission. But then my RJ obviously stands for Raquel Jaramillo. Palacio was my mother's maiden name. And since my mother is the one who always thought that I would grow up to be a writer and always encouraged me, I just thought it was a great way of honoring her memory. So that's why I kept it. Also, it worked for S.E. Hinton and J.K. Rowling, and I figured, and look, it did. So that's why.
How did you come up with the idea for Augie?
I don't know. He kind of just came to me. I knew that even though it was a little girl that I'd seen in front of the ice cream store, I'm the mother of 2 sons, and boys speak kind of came very easily to me. Star Wars, Halo, all that stuff that boys do. I was around a lot. I would come home from work and find 5 or 6 boys playing Halo in my living room, and it was easy for me to sort of pick up on what boys are like.
Well, my friend got sick, and he wanted to ask you, how did it feel? Why? I forgot, darn it.
Oh, thank you, though. That was really nice of you to ask for him.
I really like the way how the actor of Augie really made a good type of a real boy in real life.
Wow, thank you. Is that the audiobook? You mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the audiobook.
Oh, that's so great. I'm glad you like the audiobook. That's great. Thank you.
Which book did you have the most fun writing?
Oh, I think Wonder, because there were no expectations. I was writing it as, in the middle of the night and just kind of enjoying it for the story that it was. And it was kind of, it was really fun experiencing, again, having been part of the publication of so many books in my life, and knowing as I do that the truth of the publishing industry is that of all the books that are published, maybe 3% of the books actually ever really see a wide sort of market or become bestsellers. I mean, it's a very, very small, narrow percentage. So when I was writing it, it honestly never occurred to me that that Wonder would be one of those books that would kind of transcend what our expectations were. So to have experienced that as somebody who knows publishing and to have seen all of this, and also I have to say, it was really great because I'm in publishing to have all, usually publishers are competitive. There are 5 major publishers. There's Random House, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, and we all know each other and we're all competitive. But the really wonderful thing about this is because I'm in publishing, my husband works at Simon & Schuster, I was published by Random House, I was working at Workman Publishing, and I was considered like an insider. So, for instance, when the book first came out, my boss, my publisher, invited all the people from Random House to celebrate, and then people came from Simon & Schuster. I mean, it's been sort of also for publishing people, it's like one of their own actually wrote a book, and it's doing well. So it's been kind of a nice, nice thing for the publishing community. Again, I can't say enough about what a great industry I think publishing is.
I just wondered, as a mom of some preteen and teen girls, if you had any particular books that you read when you were that age that really stayed with you and made an impression? Favorite books from that time?
I remember Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. That was sort of required reading. I was always very into fantasy, and so I was reading The Lord of the Rings at that age, and maybe not. I mean, I was Frodo. That's who I identified with. I loved Little Women. I read so much. It's hard to kind of pinpoint what really. I was also reading. I remember loving James Michener when I was 14 years old, and all those. Remember those big books, would span generations, and I loved all of those. So and The Agony and the Ecstasy. I mean, I was reading grown-up books too.
Why did you do only kid parts instead of grown-up parts?
It's a really great question. I decided to avoid hearing from any of the adults in the story because I wanted to keep the story for kids, grounded in kids, about kids, and from their points of view. And we only see Augie's parents from the point of view of the kids. Of Augie and Via. And as such, they're a little bit idealized, just, maybe you guys don't even know this, but, parents have lots of different facets to them, and you might see one facet, but there might be other facets to them, and they might talk a slightly different way to friends and stuff. So for Augie, his mom and his dad were, they only wanted to show him a positive energy and support and strength that way, and that was what they were doing for their son. But I have a feeling that, let's say the mom, there were probably days when she wasn't feeling so positive, and she might have been a little bit down, and if she were talking to her friends, she'd be a lot different, and I didn't want to go into those stories. I wanted to keep this purely for children, so that's pretty much why. But that's a great question.
How did you pick the precepts, how the kids they made up their own precepts at the very end?
Well, the precepts that Mr. Brown uses were actually When I was 13 or 14 years old, again, I read a lot. Maybe I was a really nerdy kid, I don't know, but I kept a scrapbook of precepts, of quotes that kind of moved me when I was reading, or even fortune, teller, fortune cookie kind of things, or anything that kind of resonated with me. I had a little scrapbook and I would write them down. And so I actually drew from that scrapbook for Mr. Brown's precepts. The one, Fortune Favors the Bold, was one that I remember really, really impacting on me when I was little. So,
I think we have time for one more question.
Why didn't you write a second book of Wonder? Like, why didn't you write a sequel? I know, like, Augie and Me's other stories, but, like,
Right.
why?
It's yeah, my publisher is asking that exact same thing. I'll tell you the truth. I feel like I wrote what I needed to write about Wonder and Augie's story. I think we can surmise from the story that Augie will always have challenges that most of us can't even really relate to. I mean, we can relate to a certain degree, but we can't truly, he's always going to have challenges in life. But I think what we get from Wonder is that he also has whatever he needs inside of him to get through those challenges, to meet those challenges. And that's the point of the story, that he can get through it with a little help from friends, with the support of his family, with the kindness of strangers, and the kindness of people around him. I think that's really the point of Wonder. So to go into Wonder, Augie's story in the 6th grade and 7th grade, it would all kind of be the same thing. People reacting to him a certain way and him triumphing, and so I just thought, well, I'd rather keep Wonder exactly what it is and leave it at that. So, but thank you for asking. There's a part of me that kind of wonders what he'd be doing in high school and college, and I don't think I'm going to do it, though. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You guys have been awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So,